Isn't that cute? So let me introduce Rosemary and give you 1 minute on a little bit of how this came about. In part, this came about because I was listening to the New York Times book review podcast, and I heard about the new Philip Roth biography. And so I said, new biography. I'm calling Rosemary and I'm going to ask her if she could talk about this. Well, little did we know that would really blow up, but I'm going to let Rosemary pick up that story. But the part that I find much more engaging and important is the story of Rosemary. I said to her the other night, I said, Rosemary, how did you come to be this Philip Roth expert? And Rosemary said, well, you know, I like to read. I like to read. And I love Newark. And so Rosemary was doing tours of Newark. How do you put that together? Think about that. In our next career, Rosemary, the educator, Rosemary, the volunteer at Shomrei, Rosemary, so many things, loves to read. And I remember how Rob and Rosemary, you know, took care of this old synagogue in Newark. So Rosemary creates a Philip Roth tour of Newark, a bus tour of Newark. And who should show up on the bus but Philip Roth? And the story then goes from there. But for me, the more important part is how one goes from educator to reader to loving a place and creating now what will become an incredible memorial to Philip Roth's work. So with that, Rosemary, you tell them the rest of the story.
Thank you, Shirley.
And if you'll all mute yourself, let me just mute yourselves, please. And if you have questions, we will take all your questions, put them in the chat. I'll monitor that for Rosemary. And now go ahead, Rosemary.
Sure. Shirley's a great partner in this. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here and to see the faces of so many Shomrei friends, and a special welcome to my own family and friends who are joining the Shomrei Emunah community tonight. I have a quick emendation, which is that the word curator does not aptly apply to me. That person, the Roth curator, is Nadine Sergeyev, librarian at the Newark Public Library, who is a miracle worker and who also happens to be on this Zoom tonight. The title of my talk this evening is Philip Roth and Biography. It's an ambiguous title because I mean it both to cover biographies of Roth, but also to consider the theme, Roth and biography. The talk, as Shirley said, was engendered by the controversy surrounding Blake Bailey's Roth biography, which was published last April. I will get to Blake, but my talk has 3 parts. The first part of my talk is that I will describe 6 biographies of Philip Roth. In the second part, I will talk about the complicated theme of the use of biography in Roth's novels. In the third part of my talk, I will talk about Roth and the Jews. This is, after all, my synagogue. Although, as you may imagine, the topic Roth and the Jews is itself a long and rich subject. To begin then, and I do have a few slides to share with you, so Shirley and I will be communicating about that. To begin with then, I'm going to review 6 biographies and memoirs by and about Philip Roth. Shirley, do you want to put up the first slide?
I do, so just give me a moment here.
Sure.
Hang on, wrong picture. Let me make the right one.
The facts.
Yeah, hang on. And I'm going to share my screen, but now I have to. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you. The Facts, a Novelist's Autobiography by Roth, published in 1988. It is a straightforward, slim autobiographical essay. The book offers one response by Roth to being persistently accused of autobiography in his fiction. So he writes an autobiography. In The Facts, he retells a salient story of his biography, that the woman he was seeing, named Josie in The Facts and Maggie in life, faked a pregnancy by paying an obviously pregnant woman in Tompkins Square Park for her urine and having it tested as her own, using the result to force Roth to marry her. Roth states that he wrote the passage into the novel, My Life as a Man, as true to life events as he could make it. He writes in The Facts, quote, probably nothing else in my work more precisely duplicates the autobiographical facts. But he has a coda in The Facts in the form of a letter written to Roth by Zuckerman, the fictional alter ego narrator of his novels. The letter urges Roth not to publish The Facts. Zuckerman, in his letter, accuses Roth of dissembling in factualizing. Quote, you try to pass off here as frankness what looks to me like the dance of the seven veils. What's on the page is like a code for something that's missing. And Zuckerman cites, for instance, the pseudonyms Roth employs throughout the book. Zuckerman tells Roth that, in fact, he is less inhibited and more honest in fiction than he is in writing fact. Even in his autobiography, Roth will not let the theme lie still, this matter of the intertwining of fiction and biography. Next, and this could be the next slide, Shirley.
Yes, ma'am.
I come to the book, Roth Unbound, A Writer and His Books by Claudia Roth Pierpont. Published in 2013, it reads like a book-length New Yorker profile. Roth and Claudia Roth Pierpont were friends. Roth once said to Pierpont, were we ever married? He also called the block in Manhattan where they both lived the writer's block. Claudia's book is a biography of the novelist with the life written around the creation, writing, and publication of the novels in order. Next slide.
Oops.
Last year was published Here We Are, My Friendship with Philip Roth.
Rosemary, am I on the wrong slide?
Yeah, go one down.
Go one down. Hang on. Don't move yet. There,
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So last year was published Here We Are, My Friendship with Philip Roth by Roth's close friend, the writer Benjamin Taylor. It is a memoir of a friendship with conversations and anecdotes from over 20 years. It is tender, thoughtful, and honest. Here's a passage. It's not an anecdote, but a rumination that happens to be on the subject of this talk. And I quote from Ben. Why was the public so exceptionally interested in Roth's personal life? E.L. Doctorow inspired no such curiosity. Neither Alice Munro, nor Toni Morrison, nor Cormac McCarthy. Gossip about Cynthia Ozick is hard to come by. About Don DeLillo, it is nil. But Philip was something else altogether. Despite all the shifts and guises of fiction, it has been not so much the protagonist as the man himself, who in book after book keeps banging into the public eye, provoking adulation, hatred, learned commentary, everything but indifference. As with few other writers, readers have felt admitted into an inner sanctum they feel strongly about. Which brings us to, next slide, the newly published, here we go, which brings us to the newly published, then unpublished, and soon to be republished, Philip Roth, The Biography by Blake Bailey. The situation here is Rothian in the extreme, with the life of the biographer entangled, however unfairly, with the biography of the subject. The book is a straightforward chronological life story. I think Philip would have approved of it, and indeed, he had input into it. He also gave Blake access to hundreds of pages of papers and notes with the instruction that the papers were to be destroyed after the publication of the grand work. And grand it is at 900 pages. The book's critical reception was mixed, with Cynthia Ozick calling it a narrative masterwork in the New York Times, while other publications panned the subject's, that's Roth's, disregard for and mistreatment of women, in particular of Roth's two ex-wives. Some reviews went so far as to call Blake complicit in endorsing Roth's griping misogynistic views and behaviors. There has also been criticism of Blake's narrow focus on sex and grudges. But the problem arose when several women accused Blake of sexual advances, manipulation, and misconduct, followed by one credible rape accusation. In the wake of the revelation, several things happened, most notably that the publisher at first stopped printing, that was Norton, first stopped printing and then stopped publishing the book. There were also articles mistakenly conflating Blake's crimes with Roth's life. Lately, the controversy has settled on the question of what to do with Blake's Roth papers. Destroy them, according to Roth's clear wishes, when the result has been so fraught and so questioned a biography? Commission a new biography. Make the papers available to other scholars and writers. I don't know what's going to happen. Stay tuned. Next slide, Shirley.
Got
it. Ira Nadell's Philip Roth, A Counter Life, was also published this spring. It is also about 900 pages. Ira is a Roth scholar who lives in Vancouver. The power of Ira's book lies in its research. It is meticulously researched, with rich background the whole way through. The weakness lies in Ira's psychologizing Roth, heavier at the beginning of the book and irritating, at least to me. Finally, for the sixth book, there is no slide because the book is not yet written. This brings us finally to Stephen Zipperstein, Stanford Jewish Studies scholar, who is writing a new life of Roth. Steve's book is being written for the Yale series Jewish Lives, which is an interesting collection in which Rav Kook sits on the same shelf as Bugsy Siegel. It is also in this series that I found out in Ben Taylor's biography that Proust was Jewish. I contacted Zipperstein to ask if he had an image of his book that I could use for this talk. He said the only image would be of him sitting at his desk, and that in the wake of the Blake Bailey debacle, he is writing as fast as he can. So now on to the second part of my talk, Roth and biography as a theme. Roth troubled and explored the theme of biography and fiction over and over in his books. Fact and fiction are so intertwined and assimilated in Roth's books that they seem indecipherable, awaiting excavation by Roth scholars. Here are some Roth quotations on the troublesome and troubling intersection of fiction and biography. From Roth: why was Portnoy's complaint at once such a hit and a scandal? To begin, a novel in the guise of a confession was received and judged by any number of readers as a confession in the guise of a novel. Next quotation: I write fiction and I'm told it's autobiography. I write autobiography and I'm told it's fiction. So since I'm so dim and they're so smart, let them decide what it is or it isn't. And finally, and this is a conversational quote, I don't remember my childhood any better than the rest of you remember your childhoods. The difference is I have Charles Cummings. This quote was spoken by Roth in my presence, testifying to the fact that his childhood memories in his fiction were at least in part supplied and refined by his researcher in Newark, Charles Cummings, then the Newark Public Library's New Jersey room librarian and the city's historian. And the facts, which presumably was factual, as I said before, ends with Zuckerman's letter to Roth questioning its honesty. Throughout much of his fiction, Roth uses an identifiable alter ego named Zuckerman or Tarnopol or Kepesh, but the alter ego writer is purposely written to intended to be identified with Roth. In The Counterlife, Nathan Zuckerman, the narrator, is asked if he writes in quest of immortality, and he answers, if you're from New Jersey, Nathan said, and you write 30 books and you win the Nobel Prize, which Roth never did, and you live to be white-haired and 95, it's highly unlikely, but not impossible, that after your death, they decide to name a rest stop for you on the New Jersey Turnpike. For a New Jersey novelist, that's as much immortality as it's realistic to hope for. We have identifiable Rothian facts attributed to the fictive narrator, Zuckerman. And so after the intentional blurring of fiction and fact, from here it is a short distance to Roth naming a character, Philip Roth, in the novel Operation Shylock in 1993. Furthermore, the character Philip Roth is dogged by an imposter, also named Philip Roth, who is wrecking his reputation by traveling Israel, promoting a policy he calls diasporism, that Ashkenazi Jews should return to the regions from which they originated. The situation may be absurd, humorous, maddening even, but it is a funhouse distortion of the life Roth led, forever charged with being Philip Roth and being unable to escape his own fictive doppelgangers. A car drove by him in Woodstock, New York, and the driver rolled down the window and shouted, "Hey, Portnoy!" There is no solving the riddle of Roth and biography, of his extracting fiction from life or writing about life in fiction. He troubled and explored this theme throughout his books. And finally, my third part, Roth and the Jews. A few moments. I'm not doing justice to this topic, but I'm picking out a few moments. There was a 1962 symposium at Yeshiva University to which Roth, Ralph Ellison, and Pietro Di Donato were asked to ponder aloud the question of whether so-called minority writers felt a crisis of conscience in their depictions of members of their communities in their fiction. Roth obviously was Jewish, Ellison Black, and DiDonato Italian-American. Roth was naive to think that the yeshiva audience was equally interested in Ellison's and DiDonato's approaches to the matter. The yeshiva moderator and the audience were most interested in Roth, as became evident in the question and answer period. Roth's works at the time, Goodbye Columbus and Other Stories, especially Defender of the Faith, were widely reviled by rabbis and other Jewish thinkers for being bad for the Jews. And here are some quotes that come out about his early work. "What is being done to silence this man?" was one rabbi's remark. "Medieval Jews would have known what to do with him." And "Such conceptions of Jews ultimately led to the murder of 6 million in our time." Roth remembers feeling blindsided, though currently scholars revisiting the tape of the event are questioning his recollection. He went out afterward, after the evening, to the stage delicatessen, where he vowed to his friends, "I'll never write about Jews again." It was only later that he came to appreciate that the angry crowd had handed him his theme. Roth has 3 essays from around the time of the Yeshiva Symposium on the subject of writing about the Jews. One is called New Jewish Stereotypes, and it was written in 1961, responding to an attack on him by Leon Uris. His essay, Imagining Jews, in 1962, is taken from the prepared remarks he made at the Yeshiva University Symposium. Here he says that Emma Bovary cannot be read to represent all provincial French women, nor does Raskolnikov represent all Russian students. A character does not damn a race. He further considers his theme in 1963 in an essay called Writing About Jews, here saying, "The world of fiction frees us from the circumscriptions that society places on feelings." This was actually Roth's lifelong struggle while writing, to free himself, he says, from shame. These and all Roth's nonfiction essays are collected in a volume called Why Write, published by the Library of America. In 2014, the enfant terrible of Jewish American fiction received an honorary doctorate from the Jewish Theological Seminary. Roth valued the degree, which he saw and which was seen generally as the Jewish communities coming to embrace Roth. And what happened between 1965 and the end of his writing career? Roth continued to write about Jews. Portnoy's complaint, he said in a PBS documentary, quote, "didn't help. It fueled the outrage of some Jewish leaders against Roth's informing on the Jews." The Counterlife in 1986, which is long my sleeper favorite among Roth's novels, and Operation Shylock, which I have already mentioned, both take place in Israel. And to capture the Rothian flavor, here is a passage from Operation Shylock in which the narrator, Philip Roth, answers his double, also Philip Roth, who is urging that the Jews return to Riga, Vilnius, Warsaw, Krakow, Bucharest, Kiev, and Salonika. Roth, the character, responds, "I lived 11 years in London, not in bigoted, backwater, Pope-ridden Poland, but in civilized, secularized, worldly-wise England. When the first 100,000 Jews come rolling into Waterloo Station with their belongings in tow, I really want to be there. I want to see with my very own eyes the welcoming committee of English Goyim waiting on the platform with their champagne. They're here, more Jews, jolly good. Then there is, as you know, the plot against America in 2004, a counter history about a Nazi-influenced takeover of the American government in which Jews are attacked, relocated, terrorized, and murdered. All returns to normal after the dark nightmare ends. But several years ago, when I told a rabbi I knew well that I was involved in a Philip Roth project, he asked me earnestly, how could a Jew write such a book? He intended the same question as the rabbis did in 1962. How could a Jewish writer put such ideas into the heads of the Gentiles? Roth and the Jews, Roth and biography, biography and fiction. These are Rothian themes that will forever be troubled and troubling, and the questions unresolved. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Rosemary. I'm clapping for the whole group. Thank you. So I'm opening the floor for questions. I didn't see any in the chat. I think people were incredibly engaged in what you were saying. Any questions to start Rosemary off? Rosemary, let's do a personal moment, because you've spent time with Roth. How do you make, in terms of you're meeting him, you're working with him, how do you make sense of some of this, these contradictions for yourself?
Contradictions in what way? Just clarify what you mean. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's what I'm thinking, were the biographies accurate in how he was portrayed in terms of women, or?
Okay, I can speak to that. Roth was not a misogynist. I was never involved with him, so I don't know how that felt. But I do know several things. I mean, he was gracious, funny, genteel, wonderful to be around, relaxed, accepting. He was terrific. But you don't have to take my word for it. His deathbed scene is written about both by Ben Taylor and by Blake Bailey. And they both document the fact that there was, a cluster of 20 close friends with Roth in his final days in the hospital in New York. And in that group, there were 5 or 6 former lovers. And Ben Taylor writes, I don't know what my dying bedside scene will be, but I'll tell you right now, there won't be 5 or 6 former lovers hanging around. Funny. The fact is, Roth was generous. He, set up education accounts for the children of his lovers after their relationships had ended and they'd gone on to marriages. Roth took care of them their whole life. He took care of any of them when they were ailing, financially and personally, and called every day. And he was just a very generous person. Having said all that, he was not a misogynist, nor was he a monogamist. And the way he led and had to live his life violated the norms that most people live by, and are frequently read into and overread, I think.
Thank you. So here, going back to Roth and the Jews, we're moving away from the women for a moment. Here's a question. Is Roth much more widely read among Jews than non-Jews?
He's
And
more widely read among old people than young people. No offense to anybody on this call.
interesting. But when I first read Roth, I think I was still young, but of course, but the other part of that question, part two, is, I like your answer though. Is he quoted by anti-Semites? Are his words used in a way that he would not have wanted? I guess is the question.
Well, I'm obviously not familiar with anti-Semitic literature, but I will say that his own answer exactly speaks to that concern. He says, you know, there isn't a tremendous destructive power in literature. Yeah, that's just not the way literature is embraced by the society. And he says that I'm currently studying the transcript of that 1962 symposium. And he speaks to that point that people don't pick up his writing and rail against the Jews. The Jews worry about it, but it's not something that has happened.
Interesting. That was from Jean. Here's a question from Tim. And Tim wants to know, what did you learn about Roth while working with his personal library? That surprised you?
What did I learn? What was the last part of the question? That surprised me?
Yeah.
Well, Tim was in the room most of the time when I was being surprised. We one day Nadine was showing us the material that she had unearthed, cataloging through the library, and she showed us a book jacket, and the book jacket is of a book called The Nightmare Decade by a Rutgers historian named Fred Cook. It is about the McCarthy era in America, and Roth, it is evident, used the book as a source for his novel I Married a Communist, because as Nadine was handling the book in the library, on the reverse of the cover were notes and outlines for I Married a Communist. So one really saw the interaction of reading and writing in the imagination of this great author. Moments like that were stunning to me.
Thank you. So since we can't go through everything, can you go back to those biographies and go, for me anyway, I was curious about, whoops, I think Dale was going to ask something.
No, it's actually Matt.
I was just going to follow, Rosemary, this is fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you for doing this. What, just in terms of the source material, I just recently reread American Pastoral, which is really great. Everyone should read it. It's really a fabulous book. Do you know what he was sort of reading and using his research in writing American Pastoral?
Well, what a good question. I know that he worked incredibly closely with Charles Cummings at the Newark Public Library, and that Charles and Roth literally walked around Newark looking for the glove factory,
Right,
and found an old factory building on Central Avenue. And Tim is currently combing through some of the Cummings papers, which are in the library, and that may shed some light on your question. There are shelves in the personal library where he clusters source material for particular books. We have that on Nemesis, and we have that on The Plot Against America, but not on American Pastoral.
this was the awful. I mean, I don't want to give the plot away, but probably most people who read it. The awful violence in the post office.
He says, I mean, I don't remember where I read this, and I shouldn't spout things where I don't remember the source, but he said he was thinking about Kathy Boudin's history.
Right. I guess that would make sense, right?
But I don't remember where I read that, so I can't direct you to it. I can look it up and get back to you, but
That's all right. It's
one of
just
those random factoids,
that book just swept in so much, of the
Well, it does, and I appreciate you're talking about it, because what's great about Roth is his writing. One of the things that's great about him is his writing being a window into eras of American life and history and reality. And that book is certainly that
He
about
also, he still seemed to have nailed that those kind of places in Western New Jersey, you know, what I think you call it
Rimrock.
Rimrock, right?
He said it was based on Mendham.
Right. It felt like, you know, it was great. Anyway, enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question, Josie, do you want to unmute yourself? Because this is a pretty long statement that you've made in your question. So.
Yeah, I see a conversation about Roth asking the old question, can you dislike the artist in his personal life, but admire him or her as a great artist? And I've just finished, or almost finished, the Blake biography, and I think he comes across as callous and mean and selfish with the women in his life. I think he comes across horrible.
And does that put you in conflict about wanting to read or not read his work?
No, but there's the question, can you, dislike him as a human being, think that he's a real, pardon me, a real jerk, and still admire his work? I mean, this goes towards many great artists, writers, poets, painters. How do you judge them? By who they were or what they created?
Well, that's a question that everybody on this call could answer, so
Yeah.
chime in.
Yeah. That's one of those big questions. And the answer changes a lot depending on what generation you're a part of. I think that I see the millennial generation, there's less tolerance than perhaps for in an older generation, as Rosemary said, but I don't know the answer. Any thoughts?
Yeah,
Eileen.
I didn't think too much about it when the biography was pulled because I hadn't read it yet. And then I read it. And while I don't like everything about Roth, I think it does a disservice to pull a book because of either the subjects or the author's personal behavior. That smacks of the worst censorship, I think.
There's been an outcry about
in a
that.
free society, that shouldn't happen.
Right, there's been an
I'm
outcry
sorry?
about that. There's a long letter signed by many important writers objecting to Norton's decision to
Yeah.
cease publication of the book.
This isn't the only book that's been affected in the past few years, or work of art. And it's censorship. I mean, I think pure and simple.
Big question. Rosemary, there's an easier question.
Oh, good, I like those.
Or maybe not. It's when and why did he start writing, and what were some of his earliest influences?
Well, first of all, we have something in the collection that may be, and we have Mickey Auerbach on the Zoom tonight. She was kind enough to donate to the library Roth's letters to her in 1952.
Wow.
I don't know of earlier full-length Roth letters. I'm not going to say there aren't any. I haven't buried myself at the Library of Congress, but I did look through the finding aid, and they're quite early. All I can tell you is that when Roth was 19, he was a hell of a writer. And Mickey can attest to that. They're just letters, but that he's a writer is evident in the letters when he was 19. What else were his early influences? He originally set out to write sort of great American fiction. And it was in a conversation when he was in graduate school at Chicago. He was in graduate school in English, and he sat down and was just chatting with a writer friend of his, whose name is going to escape me right now. I'm sorry about that. That's too bad. And he told him the story that was the backstory to Goodbye Columbus. And the writer friend said to him, why are you trying to sound like Henry James? Just write your own stories, you know? And Roth didn't accept that fully. He didn't do a breakout narrative before Portnoy's Complaint. He had a few more traditional great American novel influenced books. But I would say that he was, even as a youngster, was an incredibly fluent writer. And that Goodbye Columbus, you know, he came to his subject quite naturally, having tried other things first, if that's a reasonable answer.
Amazing. Yeah. So, Rosemary, you just referred to Mickey Auerbach, who's been on the call. I don't know if Mickey wants to speak for herself about her relationship, or do you want to introduce Mickey Auerbach?
I don't know that she wants, Mickey, I'm sorry to talk about you, and I don't know that you want to be introduced. But
On video, you can introduce me.
okay, do you want to speak for a moment, Mickey, or do you want me to talk?
I will let you talk. I will say that this was such an interesting part of my life, as many years ago as my romance with him was. It is so vivid in my memory because he was such a dynamic force, and I was mesmerized by this man. So I will mention the letter, or the list rather. I did give the library the list of how to make Mickey an intellectual, which he wrote in pencil, in scribble. And I thought that was very, very interesting.
It's wonderfully interesting, Mickey, and we're delighted to have it, as you know. So Mickey and Roth were camp counselors together at Pocono's Highland Camp in 1952. And Roth produced one evening a list called How to Make Mickey an Intellectual. And it's a list of what Roth thought was important reading when he was 19. And we have that in the library. So please come visit the library and read it for yourself. It's fabulous.
Thank you. Mickey, thank you for speaking. I feel like we're getting a historic biographical moment right here with your presence. So thank you.
What did he recommend?
He started with Tom Wolfe.
Tom Wolfe and went on.
You know, Mickey, do you remember How to Make Yourself an Intellectual?
Well, I remember him telling me that and showing me the list. I'm very glad and happy that through my life, I didn't bump into him again, because he would have been disappointed.
Oh, please. Everything from Tom Wolfe to
Even Hemingway was in there, I believe.
Hemingway, Keats. I mean, it was a hit parade.
He was very impressed with James Joyce, by the way. He
Oh,
bring him up many times.
that's interesting.
And with Thomas Wolfe, when he said to me, I'm sure that this will inspire you, because as Thomas Wolfe said, you can't go home again. So in other words.
Yeah, forgive me, I said Tom Wolfe. It's obviously Thomas Wolfe, and you can't go home again.
Right. So he felt that he had inspired me enough that I can't go on with my fun-loving teenage acquaintances, that I have to definitely switch to people on a more intellectual level. But I did continue to have fun anyway.
Good for you.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Mickey. So I have another question that just came in. Two more. One more. So Marty Myers, I see your question. And he was wondering if there were any specific Holocaust connections for Roth and his family that impacted his writing? For example, the ghostwriter.
Not that I know of. And if anybody on the call, like my colleagues from the library, knows something I'm not thinking of, please unmute and speak up. I don't know about his own family's Holocaust connections. I feel like I should, that some of that has been written, but I don't off the top of my head.
There's still time, Rosemary.
Well, he, Roth does have these counterfactual histories, like in The Ghostwriter, where Anne Frank lives and is, we find her in rural New England. He has a short story or an essay. I'm a little confused now. Anyway, where Kafka lives and makes it to the United States and ends up as Roth's Hebrew school teacher in Weequahic. So he is interested in these counterfactual histories throughout.
Great. Oh. So, Rosemary, I don't see any other questions. Is there anything that we should have asked you that we haven't?
Oh, dear.
How's that?
Well, I'll use a moment to offer a little advertisement for the Philip Roth Personal Library, because it's fascinating and beautiful and has many tidbits, like the book jacket, like Mickey's letters. Just you really get inside the head of a, do you still do bus tours? Marty, I'll tell you, I haven't done a bus tour in a long time, but we have sometimes put in the synagogue auction the tour of Ross Newark. So if you're interested in the tour of Ross Newark, get in touch, we can talk.
That may become a program that we do as an offshoot from this, now that we can go outside and do all this stuff.
Yeah, I'll speak for Rob. We're willing to do a bus tour.
That would be, okay, so I'm on the programming committee, so I'm going to put that on for some activity after the holidays.
Okay, we're getting a couple of questions that they're going by quickly. If you could look at them, Shirley.
And yes, and so the question was, can we talk to you? Can you give us a tour of the Roth Personal Library in Newark?
I can. Yes to the bus tour, says Dale. Our librarian, Nadine Sergeev, I know it sounded like a figure of speech when I called her a miracle worker, but it's really pretty accurate. And the fact of the matter is, I am happy to meet members of this congregation in the space and do an outing and show you around. But if you show up there for a tour or want to contact Nadine, which you can do through the website or on the library's website, she knows everything. You don't need me. I'm happy to do it, but you really, there's a lot of text in and amongst the exhibition that will be very informative. And in fact, lately I find myself, when I take people into the exhibition, I step back because I don't want to come between you and your experience of Roth. So all that to say, you don't need me, and yes, I'm happy to do it.
So I have one more on a lighter note, is how did he get Saul Bellow's top hat? I don't know.
Saul Bellow.
Huh?
From Saul Bellow.
So that's an easy answer.
I don't know what the conversation was. It may be in the Bailey book, if anybody who's read it more recently than I did remembers. There may have been a conversation.
That's the point. I read it. I don't recall that story. It was good. The story I would remember wondering about it.
I thought it's in one of the biographies. I'll tell you what. Is that Charles talking?
Yes.
Just such a weird thing to say.
Well, he got it from Sobello. What the
I
exchange
know
was,
where
I don't
it's-
remember, but if it's in one of the biographies, I'll look it up.
Okay.
So two other points here. One is Nadine put the link to the, I guess that's to the Roth collection at the library.
It's PRPL, NPL.
Yes.
That's our webpage.
Okay, so that is in the chat. And then Linda actually just opened up a whole new conversation that we might not have time for, but maybe it's our last question.
Go, Linda.
Of course. I'm struck by Mickey's stories of Philip Roth. Would you be willing to tell one or two anecdotes about Philip Roth that illustrate how his writing was supposed to help him deal with his shame, as I believe that you initially mentioned?
Linda, let's have lunch.
Can we all come to lunch?
Yeah, there are books of Ross that do we have any fans of Sabbath Theater in the room? That book is hard to read, and it was Ross' favorite of his books. And it is the book that, yes, Neil, are you a fan of Sabbath Theater? I see Bevy turning around. Anyway, I have a hard time reading that book. He has dealt with his shame. I find it awful to read. I think a little bit of shame goes a long way. But that was Ross' inner struggle, and he was pleased with the result in Sabbath Theater, more than pleased.
Rosemary, I didn't read the book. What was he feeling ashamed about?
I'm not talking about that in mixed company.
Oh,
Lunch, Linda, lunch.
okay.
So I think with that, we've gone from all elements of Philip Roth's biography, and we've ended on the note of shame, but I think we can really just talk about, more importantly, how much we appreciate what you have given us, Rosemary, because
Thank
this
you.
is an incredible talk, and I feel like we should continue it. So I'm going to follow up on the bus tours, because I saw a lot of votes for the bus tours.
Okay. And my email's in the directory. So if people, want to continue talking, write me. And if somehow there's an interest in a Shomrei contingent going together to the library, fine. I'd be happy to do that.
So, and I guess Dale gets the final note. She says, thank you for an exciting and fascinating
Thank you, Dale.
And before I say goodbye to all of you, we have another at Nourish coming up on July 20th, changing the tone a little bit. We will be having Edward Isaac Dovere, D-O-V-E-R-E, who has written, he just came out with Random House, The Battle for the Soul. And that is actually a US political book. And I think should be a very interesting conversation as well, where the author will come talk to us about Battle for the Soul. So, Rosemary, I can't thank you enough for saying.
You're welcome, Shirley.
And putting so much of yourself into this and the time you spent, and we want more of you. Thank you all.
Be in touch, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
thanks. And let's do lunch.
Fine.
I'm not stopping this. I'm letting people say goodbye.
Okay. Dale and Matt, thanks.
Bye.
I hear Rob coming downstairs, so
He was sitting in the dark. Why was he sitting in the dark?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him. I was downstairs. He was upstairs.
This was wonderful, Rosemary. And
Thank you, Shirley.
thank you for all of this. I guess I should stop
Recording.
Oh, yeah.
Mickey, thank you for chiming in. That's always, it's great. I mean, people are right. It's like having,